What if the person everyone thought needed saving actually became the one changing everything? In this episode of The Testaments, Daisy reaches her breaking point, secretly reunites with June in one of the show's most emotional moments yet, accidentally reveals devastating news about Hannah, now Agnes, and may have just changed Becca's fate forever. But while Daisy believes she's fighting to save her friend, the episode quietly raises a darker question. Has she become too dangerous for Mayday to trust? And by the end, one heartbreaking sacrifice changes everything. Daisy has spent most of the Testaments trying to survive a world she never truly understood, but this episode feels different because for the first time, she stops reacting to Gilead's cruelty and starts fighting against it directly. And honestly, this might be the moment Daisy transforms from someone caught inside the story into someone capable of changing it. After meeting Garth in the garden, Daisy is completely fed up. Becka is in serious danger, and from Daisy's perspective, Mayday should be doing something, anything to help. Becka isn't just another victim trapped in Gilead anymore. She's someone Daisy genuinely cares about, someone who has suffered, someone who never deserved the nightmare she's now trapped in. But Garth shuts the idea down almost immediately. He tells Daisy there's nothing they can do, and this is where the episode quietly exposes one of its biggest moral conflicts. Because Garth isn't necessarily being heartless here, he's being pragmatic. Resistance groups survive by making impossible choices, and sometimes that means accepting losses no one wants to accept. From his point of view, Becca's situation may already be too dangerous to interfere with. But Daisy sees things completely differently. To her, if Mayday claims to stand against Gilead's cruelty, then how can they just stand by while innocent girls suffer? And honestly, Daisy has a point. Because what's the purpose of resistance if the people you're fighting for still end up abandoned? That frustration pushes Daisy to her breaking point. She threatens to quit Mayday entirely, telling Garth that if nobody else will help Becka, then she will. And this moment matters far more than it first seems. At face value, it sounds like anger, a teenager lashing out emotionally. But underneath that, something much bigger is happening. Daisy is rejecting the idea that survival alone is enough. She's choosing morality over strategy. And in a world like Gilead, that kind of thinking can either make you heroic or get you killed. But just when it feels like Daisy's rebellion has reached a dead end, the episode suddenly becomes much stranger. Later, Garth secretly tunes into Radio Free Boston and hears June receive a message about a loose cannon that will be taken care of that evening. Now, the show is clearly trying to make viewers nervous here. Because who exactly is the loose cannon? The episode never says it outright, but it certainly feels like Daisy could be the person they're talking about. After all, she's suddenly emotional, unpredictable, and threatening to go rogue. But this is where I think the show intentionally wants us to question Mayday. Because if Daisy really is the loose cannon, then what does that say about the resistance? Are they protecting people or managing liabilities? At the same time, there's another interpretation here. Maybe taken care of never meant silencing Daisy at all. Maybe it meant protecting her. And that possibility becomes much clearer once Daisy receives a secret message hidden inside one of the honey jars, instructing her to meet at a location that evening. That little detail feels so perfectly the Testaments. In Gilead, even communication has to survive underground. Every message is hidden, every movement secret. And what happens next delivers one of the strongest emotional moments of the season. When Daisy arrived at the location, she's quietly transported in the honey delivery truck before eventually ending up at a dock. And standing there waiting for her is June. Honestly, this reunion changes everything. Because Daisy thinks June is there for one reason, to help Becka. But June has something completely different in mind. She's there to extract Daisy, and suddenly both characters find themselves in conflict for reasons that actually make perfect sense. June is thinking like someone who has survived Gilead. She knows exactly how dangerous staying is. She's seen people tortured, broken, executed. She understands the cost better than almost anyone alive. To her, Daisy staying behind feels like suicide. But Daisy sees things through a completely different lens. How can she leave when Becka is still trapped? How can she escape knowing innocent girls are suffering? And honestly, this disagreement is what makes the scene feel so human. Neither woman is wrong. June wants to save Daisy because she loves her and knows the danger. Daisy wants to stay because she refuses to abandon people she cares about. But then the conversation suddenly becomes something much deeper. While explaining why Becka deserves saving, Daisy casually mentions someone else, Agnes. And the second she says the name, everything changes. Because viewers instantly realize something Daisy doesn't fully understand in that moment. Agnes MacKenzie is Hannah, June's daughter. And the emotional weight of what happens next is honestly devastating, because after everything June has suffered, after years of separation and loss, she suddenly realizes Daisy has actually known her daughter. Imagine that for a second. Imagine hearing someone else knows your child better than you do. Someone else has spent time with her, seen who she became, watched her grow. That pain quietly sits underneath everything June says next. Because notice what June asks. She doesn't immediately ask about resistance plans or escape routes. She asks what Agnes is like. Is she happy? What kind of person has she become? That tells you everything you need to know about June. After all the violence, all the resistance, all the suffering, she's still a mother first. And Daisy's answer might be exactly what June needed to hear. She describes Agnes as one of the bravest people she's ever met. And honestly, that line carries so much emotional meaning. Because bravery means Hannah still exists underneath Agnes. She hasn't disappeared. She hasn't been completely erased by Gilead. She's still fighting in her own way. You can almost feel June holding on to that information like oxygen. But just when it feels like June might convince Daisy to leave, Daisy shocks her. She refuses extraction. And honestly, this might be Daisy's boldest moment in the entire series so far. Because Daisy knows the risks. She understands she could die. She understands Gilead is brutal. But she makes something very clear. It has to be her decision. And that line matters more than people might realize, because choice is one of the biggest themes in both The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments. Gilead strips women of agency. It decides where they live, what they wear, who they belong to, what happens to their bodies. So Daisy insisting on making her own choice, even if it's dangerous, feels quietly revolutionary. She refuses to let fear decide for her. And surprisingly, June seems to understand, not because she agrees, but because she recognizes something familiar. Daisy has the same stubborn fire that June herself once had. When Daisy finally returns to school, the tension immediately spikes because the guards are already looking for her. And for a second, it genuinely feels like she's about to get caught. If Gilead discovers she secretly disappeared in the middle of the night, the consequences would likely be brutal. But then Garth suddenly steps in. And honestly, this moment completely changes how we should view him. Earlier, he seemed cold and detached, like someone willing to sacrifice Becka for the mission. But here, he risks himself to protect Daisy. He hands her a cigarette and quickly creates an excuse, pretending she only snuck out to smoke. It's smart, believable, and most importantly, it saves her. That moment proves something important about Garth. He isn't heartless, he cares. He's just someone who has lived in survival mode long enough to believe emotions can get people killed. But Daisy isn't done pushing people yet, because what happens next may be secretly the most important moment in the episode. When Aunt Lydia calls Daisy into her office, it initially feels like punishment, but Daisy completely flips the power dynamic. Instead of apologizing, she confronts Lydia about Becka. And honestly, this scene deserves way more attention than it's getting, because Daisy doesn't just argue, she emotionally dismantles Lydia. She tells her something simple but devastating. Mothers would do anything for their children, even die for them. Then Daisy asks the question Lydia clearly doesn't want to hear. What are you doing to save Becka? And suddenly Lydia has nowhere left to hide. Because this has always been Lydia's contradiction. She tells herself she protects girls. She believes she's helping them survive Gilead. But Daisy forces her to confront a painful truth. Protection means nothing if you still allow terrible things to happen, and you can visibly see Lydia wrestling with that afterward. Now, to be fair, Lydia already cared about Becca before this moment. The show has clearly been building her internal conflict for a while, but Daisy absolutely accelerates something already brewing beneath the surface. She forces Lydia to act, and that leads to one of the episode's most emotional scenes. When Lydia and Bibala visit Becca and Mrs. Grove, the truth surrounding Dr. Grove's death becomes much more complicated. Lydia reveals that when she arrived, she found Mrs. Grove leaning over Dr. Grove with pruning shears. Becca immediately seems confused, because this version of events feels different, like pieces of the story are being rearranged. Then Bidala doubles down, insisting Becca only tried to resuscitate her father, explaining why she was covered in blood. And in that moment, the devastating reality finally clicks. Mrs. Grove is taking the fall, not because she's guilty, but because she's a mother, and mothers in Gilead are often forced into impossible choices. She understands what Becca's future could become: execution, punishment, or perhaps something even worse, being turned into a handmaid. So she makes an impossible decision. She accepts blame for a murder she likely didn't commit, not to save herself, but to save her daughter. And honestly, this is where the episode becomes emotionally brutal, because Daisy's earlier words suddenly echo through everything. Mothers would die for their children, and Mrs. Grove proves that she means it. But here's the bigger question the episode quietly leaves hanging. Does this actually save Becca? Or does it only delay something worse? Because this is Gilead. Nothing stays simple for long. A confession doesn't guarantee safety. Power shifts constantly. Secrets get exposed. And Becca is still deeply vulnerable. At the same time, Daisy herself may now be walking into even greater danger. She's becoming harder to control, more emotional, more willing to take risks. And while that makes her heroic, it may also make her dangerous, to herself and to Mayday's plans. By the end of the episode, one thing feels clear. Daisy isn't just surviving anymore. She's changing people. She reconnects June to Hannah emotionally. She pushes Lydia toward action. She forces Garth to show compassion. And she refuses to abandon Becca even when escape is sitting right in front of her. That's what makes Daisy suddenly feel like the emotional heart of the Testaments. She may not be the strongest person in the room, or the smartest, or the most experienced. But in a world built on fear, cruelty, and obedience, Daisy still believes people are worth saving. And honestly, that kind of belief might end up becoming the most dangerous thing in Gilead of all.